Good morning. I want to start off by asking this morning, how many people do we have here who've been married 40 years or more? A couple folks, okay. I want to just give you a reference point is that for 40 years, St. Andrew's Lutheran Church and Lutheran Family and Children's Services have been doing ministry here in your community. For 40 years, members of this congregation have exercised their faith, lived out their faith, let the light of Jesus shine into the very darkness of the community. And there's only one thing I can say, and that's thank you. Thank you for being our partners. Thank you for helping us to touch people at very challenging moments in their lives. Now, let's think about the fig tree here in Luke's gospel just for a minute. Easy way to get at this lesson. Who here has ever needed a second chance in life? Okay, if you're married, your hand better be up, okay? That the story of the fig tree is the Lenten story of God promising that He will always try to grow us as His people. He will always look over us. He will never cut us out of the vineyard because He calls us His own. It's also the story of Lutheran Family and Children's Services, that we might look at many people in a community and say, of what use are they? Look at the problems they have. How are they ever going to be productive in this world? And yet God allows us to grow hope in their lives. That's our job, to help them reinvent themselves to become the people that God intends for them to be. Now, I've kind of had a rough 2 years in one sense because I have had 20 people die between donors of Lutheran Family Children's Services, 2 friends of mine, and my father in the last 2 years. I was home a year ago, November, helping my mother clean out their condo because she's moving into a retirement community. And you got to know, my mother has never thrown anything away in her 88 years. We are sitting in her living room, and she has saved every letter she has ever received, okay? She's looking at letters from 1956 when I was 4 years old, and she has to reread every one of them and then try to decide if she's going to save. If I had stayed there to reread all those letters, I'd be moving into the home with her by now. So anyhow, we're looking through all this stuff, and she pulls out this envelope, and she gives it to me and says, "Here, Alan, I saved this for you." And I look inside, and there is every report card I had ever received on the face of this earth. Do you know, there's a reason why a lot of us go in the ministry. That's because if you look at our grades in math and chemistry and physics, yeah, right, Mark? Yeah, that's why we go study for God instead. I'm looking through these report cards, and I find my 4th grade Sunday school report card. Now, I'm dating myself, because it's been a long time since we gave report cards in Sunday school. But I'm looking at this report card, and I'm thinking, I bet it says in here, Alan should study for the ministry. Or I bet it says in here, Alan should be a budding theologian for the way that he talks about Jesus. And I'm just sitting there kind of looking at this thing, and I open it up, and under first quarter it says, Alan has a bad attitude. And I looked at the front, I thought, certainly this must not be mine. It was. And then under second quarter it says, things have not gotten much better. First, that tells you about God's funny sense of humor. But it also gives us a chance to talk about attitudes and what we bring into church. Because there are some of us that have come into church today and we're having troubles in our human relationships, be it our marriages, relationships with kids, grandchildren, and we're not quite sure what to do with all that. Some of us have come into church today and we're dealing with health issues. We are afraid. Maybe some of us have lost loved ones, and that's hard stuff. Some of us may be dealing with employment issues. If only you hadn't told the boss what you thought. But here is the message today. It's not only the message of the fig tree, it is the message of Lent. that Jesus Christ loves you. Jesus Christ cares about you, and Jesus Christ knows who you are and cannot let go of you no matter what. Even if you can't hold on to him, he will hold on to you. Our tagline at Lutheran Family is "We grow hope," because hope is the promise of tomorrow and the future. Let me tell you about some of the people we grow hope with. The biggest increase in our business lately has been in grandparents seeking the guardianship of their grandchildren. More and more grandparents are having to care for grandchildren. I had two grandparents, ages 75 and 77, in the agency 2 weeks ago. They're taking care of their 6-year-old and 8-year-old grandsons. And we asked them, "What do you want?" And I suspected we were going to get the old, a gaming system would be nice, or, a computer or a 60-inch TV. They asked for food and clothing, because they said, "I just want to know that we will be okay and that the kids will have something to eat." You imagine that? And they're trying to live on Social Security. I don't think you can do that. Lutheran Family in St. Andrews was there to make sure that they would be taken care of and they cannot be forgotten. I sat through an adoption 2 weeks ago. The mother was 14 years old. And she decided that she was just too young to care for a baby, and she was actually at the adoption when it took place, and she's holding her little daughter, and at one point in this adoption ceremony, she hands her little daughter to the new adoptive parents and says, "This is your new daughter. I know you will love her." And she gives her baby up. That's a courageous mom, to be able to say that you would be a better parent than me. Try one more. Had an 18-year-old kid who was going away to college last fall. He had been in foster care ever since he was 4 years old. At age 11, the foster parents were going to adopt him, and they were going to become a family, and all of a sudden, the foster mom died. He was in 2 other foster families, was never adopted. He's 18, going away to college. We asked him what he needed. Can you imagine being in college and never getting a letter from your parents? Or never getting that extra $10 to go do something special? Or what do you do at Thanksgiving time when everybody's packing up and getting ready to go home, and there you are, all alone? We asked him, "What did you want, to go away to college?" And he says, "Well, I'm a big football fan. If I could have a little TV set for my room and a New England Patriots jacket," at least he didn't ask for a Rams jacket, "a Patriots jacket, I'd be happy." We got him that, but we also sent him to college with the promise that he could not be forgotten. Because that's what hope is, isn't it? Hope is the promise. It is the story of Lent. It's the story of the fig tree, that we cannot be forgotten, that we can never say we are alone, because Jesus Christ holds on to us. The year is 1868. You remember that? A very good year. And there's a dying Civil War soldier, and y'all know, what do you do when you're dying? Come on, this is part of confirmation. You call the Lutheran pastor, okay? We can get you a better place in heaven. So, don't tell the district president I said that. So the Lutheran pastor comes. His name is Johann Binger. He ministers to this dying soldier, and he makes just one mistake. He says, "Is there anything else I can do for you?" And the soldier says, "There is. I have an 11-year-old son. I don't have anyone to care for him. Will you take him in?" Well, what's Binger going to do? Say no? So he takes this little boy in, and because Lutherans are sharp people, before Binger knew it, he was caring for 7 children. And the Lutherans began to send money to care for those children, and that is how the Lutheran Orphans Home started in Missouri in 1868. Now, I always wondered about Johann Binger, because, this guy started Lutheran Hospital, the Lutheran Orphans Home. He's all kinds of human care ministries. And Binger was interested. He studied for the ministry in Germany, and there he met a good German Lutheran girl, and they did that German Lutheran deal, had 3 perfect German Lutheran children, and were going to live happily ever after. They were going to live happily ever after until a plague came through that part of the world, and Johann Binger lost his wife and all 3 of his kids. Is Thomas okay? Okay, good. So Binger asked that question, what does Jesus Christ have to do with me? And he ended up coming here to Missouri. He got to St. Louis. He made a wrong turn. He ended up over in Perry County with the real Lutherans over there. And I had some lady come out of early church and say, you realize this whole side of the church over here is from Perryville, right? Oh, well. And he met another German Lutheran gal there. They had 3 more German Lutheran children, 2 girls and a boy, and that little boy died at the age of 3. So for Johann Binger, it was an answer to prayer that someone would say, will you care for my son? Because that is the son he never had. I'm going to ask you to do this today, to ask the Binger question. In this Lenten season, what does Jesus Christ need you to be about here at St. Andrews? What does Jesus Christ need you to do out in this community to let his light shine? That's the Lenten question. That's the story of making the fig tree bloom. How are you going to let your faith bloom for the sake of the kingdom? Now, this is that point in the service where normally we just collect all the checks for Lutheran Family and Children's Services and move on, but I promised your pastors I wouldn't do that to you today. Instead, as you leave this morning, and I got to tell you, my staff sitting over here, they have sat through all 3 of these services this morning, okay? Ladies, applause yes, a raise no, okay? If you stop at our table out in the lobby and pick up one of our wristbands, and I used to talk about Lance Armstrong, but that's politically incorrect now, so instead, if you'd pick up the wristband and if you'd wear it till Easter, and every time you look at that wristband, will you remember the 1,700 kids in Missouri who want to be adopted? Can you imagine what it would mean to them on Easter if they were adopted? And I'll show you the problem. Who here wants to go home with a brand new 15-year-old this morning? I've been asking that question for 17 years and can't get any takers on it. But can you imagine what it means to those kids when someone says, you're part of this family and you can't get out and we love you? Closing story. I'm sitting over in Kansas City last November with all the social ministry execs, and it's one of those deals where you go around the table and everybody talks about how bad their budget is and how bad their employees are and how horrible the world is. And we've got some folks over here from the Oaks Indian Mission in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Dave and Linda are their names, and Dave starts off and says, well, they finally put the lady in prison who killed our grandson. And I mean, everybody just kind of turned and looked because we didn't know anything about this, and he goes, I haven't said anything about this, but 4 years ago, we had a babysitter who shook our 9-month-old grandson to death, and it took 3 years. They sent her to jail for 32 years. And he stopped, and his wife's crying, and we're all kind of stunned, and he goes, it's funny how people come through stuff like this. He said, for Linda and I, we cried about this, we prayed about this, we thought about it, we struggled with it, and in the end, we came through it closer to Jesus Christ. But then he said, my daughter's the opposite. She got divorced. She hates God. She's been angry with God. And she doesn't understand in any way why this happened. And he said, we went for a whole year. All we could do was quietly pray for our daughter because she wouldn't talk to us about it. She couldn't talk to us about it. And then he said last August, the most amazing thing happened. She called us up one Saturday afternoon and said, I was looking through the phone book and I'm going to take the boys to church tomorrow. And he kind of quipped. He said, that's something, there's only 800 churches in Tulsa. She gets up the next morning, gets dressed, gets her boys dressed. They get in the car. She's pulling out of their subdivision, And she says to herself, why should I drive all the way across town for 40 minutes when I can go to that church right over there, go in, sit through the worship service, get my ticket punched, and get out early? So she drives right across the street, goes in the church, sits down. The pastor comes out, and the service begins, and she's kind of looking at this guy, and she goes, man, he looks familiar. And she's looking at this guy, and she all of a sudden realizes that that pastor was one of the jurors who convicted the lady who killed her baby. So she sits through the worship service. The service ends, and she figures, well, I just can't slink out of here, you know. So she goes up to the pastor and says, excuse me, but I'd like to introduce myself. And the guy goes, just stop. He says, I know who you are. I've been praying for you ever since that trial began. Welcome home. This is the story of Lent. It is God saying, welcome home to all of us. It's the parable of the fig tree today, that God will not cut us down. God will not leave us alone at every turn in life. He says, welcome home. Amen.